Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she checked the radio equipment one more time. The morning sun was already beating down on the rocky outcrop where Bravo Company had set up their observation post. She had been with the unit for 8 months now, always in the background, always making sure the communications worked perfectly. The soldiers called her Radio, not because they didn't respect her, but because she was so good at her job that she seemed to become one with the equipment. The observation post sat on a strategic hill overlooking the valley below. Intelligence had reported enemy movement in the area, and Bravo Company was tasked with watching and reporting. It was supposed to be a quiet assignment, 3 days of observation, then back to base. Maria's job was to maintain communication with headquarters and coordinate any supply drops they might need. She came from a small town in Texas, where her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12. By the time she was 16, she could hit a target at 300 yards with iron sights. But when she joined the Army, her test scores in electronics and communications were so high that they assigned her to signals. She didn't mind. She liked the technical challenge, and she was good at solving problems when radio equipment broke down in the field. Sergeant First Class Davis walked over to where Maria was working. He was a tall man with kind eyes who had been leading soldiers for 15 years. "How's everything looking, Santos?" "All green, Sergeant. Clear communication with base, backup systems are working, and I've got the emergency frequencies programmed in case we need them," Maria replied, not looking up from her work. "Good. What about your rifle? When did you last check it?" Maria glanced at the M4 carbine leaning against the sandbags nearby. "This morning, Sergeant. Cleaned and ready." She had qualified as expert marksman in basic training, but since then, her weapon had mostly stayed in its case while she worked on radios and communication systems. The observation post was well fortified. The engineers had done good work building the defensive positions, with clear fields of fire down into the valley. There were 12 soldiers in the unit, Davis leading, 2 machine gun teams, a medical specialist, a demolitions expert, and the rest were riflemen. Plus Maria, who everyone knew could handle a rifle, but whose main job was keeping them connected to the outside world. Private Johnson, one of the younger soldiers, came over to Maria's position. "Hey, radio, my squad radio is acting up again. Can you take a look?" Maria sighed and picked up her tools. Johnson's radio had been giving them problems for weeks. It was an older model that should have been replaced months ago. She followed him to his fighting position and spent 20 minutes diagnosing the problem. A loose connection in the antenna was causing the static. She fixed it with a small piece of wire and some electrical tape. "You're a miracle worker, Santos," Johnson said, grinning as his radio crackled back to life with clear signal. "Just know how these things work," Maria said. She had always been good with her hands, taking things apart and putting them back together. Her mechanical skills had served the unit well during their deployment. As the day wore on, the heat became intense. The soldiers rotated between their fighting positions and the shade, staying alert for any movement in the valley below. Maria stayed busy checking equipment, running diagnostics on the communication systems, and monitoring the radio traffic from other units in the area. Around noon, she noticed something strange on one of the radio frequencies. There was chatter that didn't sound right, voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize, using call signs that weren't in their books. She recorded it and brought it to Sergeant Davis. "Sergeant, I'm picking up some unusual radio traffic. It might be nothing, but the frequency they're using is close to one of our emergency channels." Davis listened to the recording with a frown. "Good catch, Santos. Send this back to intelligence. Let them figure out what it means." Maria transmitted the recording back to headquarters along with her analysis. The response came back quickly. Intelligence confirmed the voices were enemy forces, and they were much closer than expected. The observation post was no longer just watching. They might become the target. Davis gathered the squad leaders for a quick briefing. Maria continued monitoring the radios, but now she could feel the tension building. The mission had changed. They were no longer just observers. They were potentially the first line of defense for other friendly forces in the area. As evening approached, Maria noticed more strange radio traffic. The enemy was definitely operating nearby, and their communications were getting stronger, which meant they were getting closer. She plotted the signal strength on a map and showed Davis her findings. Based on the signal analysis, I think they're moving up the eastern approach to the valley. Maybe 6 to 8 kilometers out, but getting closer. Davis studied the map. That's good work, Santos. Keep monitoring. If they're planning something for tonight, we need to know about it. The sun was setting when Maria picked up the communication they had all been dreading. The enemy was planning an attack, and the observation post was definitely their target. They had somehow learned about the American position and were moving to eliminate it. Maria quickly translated what she could understand and passed the information to Davis. The attack would come before dawn, probably from multiple directions. The enemy force was larger than anyone had expected, at least 30 fighters, possibly more. Davis immediately got on the radio to headquarters, requesting immediate backup and air support. The response was not what they wanted to hear. Bad weather was moving in, and air support wouldn't be available until morning at the earliest. Ground reinforcements were at least 6 hours away. "Looks like we're on our own tonight," Davis told the squad. "Check your weapons, check your ammunition. Santos, I need you to keep monitoring their communications. Any information you can give us about their timing or approach could save our lives." As darkness fell over the observation post, Maria found herself in a position she had never expected. Her communication skills had identified the threat, and now those same skills would be crucial for the unit's survival. She checked her rifle one more time and made sure she had plenty of ammunition. She had a feeling she was going to need it. The enemy radio chatter was increasing. Based on what she could understand, they were moving into position for a coordinated assault. Multiple teams, heavy weapons, and they seemed to know exactly where the American positions were located. Maria worked through the night, intercepting and analyzing enemy communications while helping coordinate the defense. Every few minutes, she would update Davis with new intelligence. "They're moving a heavy machine gun team to the North Ridge. 2 squads approaching from the eastern slope. Their main assault will come from the south." The soldiers of Bravo Company prepared for what would be the fight of their lives, and Maria Santos, the quiet communications specialist who everyone called Radio, was about to discover that her real test was just beginning. The first shots came just after 3 in the morning. Maria was hunched over her radio equipment when the sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across the valley. She immediately reached for her headset to coordinate with headquarters, but a massive explosion nearby knocked her sideways. Enemy mortars had found their range. "Contact! Contact front!" Davis shouted into his radio. The observation post erupted into controlled chaos as soldiers moved to their fighting positions. Maria grabbed her rifle and moved to her assigned sector while keeping one ear on the radio traffic. The enemy had planned their attack well. They came from 3 directions simultaneously, using the darkness and their knowledge of the terrain to get close before opening fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the night as both sides engaged. Maria could see the enemy positions now, dark shapes moving between the rocks and scrub brush below their hilltop position. "Santos, I need communications with base now," Davis called out between bursts of gunfire. Maria crawled back to her radio position, staying low as bullets snapped overhead. She quickly established contact with headquarters and began relaying their situation. "Bravo 7, this is Overwatch. We are under heavy attack from approximately 30 enemy fighters. Multiple approach routes. Request immediate air support and reinforcement." The response crackled through her headset. "Overwatch Bravo 7. Air support still unavailable due to weather. Ground reinforcements moving to your position. ETA 4 hours. Hold your position and defend." 4 hours. Maria looked around at the 12 soldiers fighting desperately to hold back an enemy force nearly 3 times their size. 4 hours might as well be forever. The machine gun position on the north side suddenly went silent. Maria could see that something was wrong. Private Martinez was slumped over his weapon, and Johnson was trying to drag him to safety while under heavy fire. The enemy had knocked out one of their key defensive positions. "Davis, north gun is down," Maria called out. "I can see it. Take Williams and get that gun back in action." But Williams was already pinned down by sniper fire from the eastern ridge. Maria looked at the situation and made a decision that surprised even her. She grabbed extra ammunition and low-crawled toward the silent machine gun position. The distance was only 50 meters, but it felt like a mile with bullets cutting through the air above her. She reached Martinez and checked his pulse, alive but unconscious from a head wound. Johnson was applying pressure to a wound on his arm. "How bad?" Maria asked. "I'll live, but I can't operate the gun with this arm," Johnson replied through gritted teeth. Maria had trained on the machine gun in basic training, but that was over a year ago. She checked the weapon quickly. It was undamaged, but had jammed when Martinez was hit. She cleared the jam and got behind the gun, looking down at the enemy positions below. For a moment, she hesitated. This wasn't her job. She was supposed to be managing communications, not fighting on the front line. But the enemy fighters were moving closer, and if they broke through this position, the entire defense would collapse. Maria aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger. The machine gun roared to life, sending controlled bursts toward the enemy advance. She could see her tracers finding their targets, and the enemy assault faltered. The fighters who had been rushing up the slope suddenly took cover or fell back. "Good shooting, Santos!" Davis called out. "Keep that sector locked down!" For the next hour, Maria split her time between the machine gun and her radios. When enemy fighters tried to advance up the slope, she would drive them back with accurate fire. Between attacks, she would crawl back to her communication equipment to coordinate with headquarters and monitor enemy radio traffic. The enemy was getting frustrated. Maria could hear it in their radio transmissions. They had expected to overrun the position quickly, but the Americans were holding firm. However, their ammunition was running low, and they had already taken casualties. Around 4:30, Maria intercepted a critical enemy transmission. They were bringing up a recoilless rifle, a heavy weapon that could destroy their defensive positions. Based on the radio traffic, they were setting it up on the eastern ridge, about 400 meters away. "Sergeant Davis!" Maria called out. "They've got a big gun coming online on the eastern ridge, recoilless rifle. If they get that thing working, we're in serious trouble." Davis looked toward the ridge with his binoculars. "I can't see it from here. Can you spot it?" Maria moved to a different position where she had a better view of the eastern slope. After several minutes of careful observation, she spotted movement near a cluster of large rocks. "I think I see them. About 400 meters, near that distinctive rock formation that looks like a chair." "That's too far for our rifles to be effective. We need to call in artillery." Maria was already on the radio, trying to contact the nearest artillery unit. After several attempts, she got through to a battery that was within range. She passed the coordinates and requested immediate fire support. "Unable to provide fire support," came the response. "We're supporting another unit under heavy attack. You're on your own." Davis cursed under his breath. "How long before they get that thing operational?" Maria listened to the enemy radio traffic again. "Based on what I'm hearing, maybe 10 minutes. They're having trouble getting it positioned correctly." 10 minutes to figure out how to stop a weapon that could destroy their entire position. Maria studied the ridge through her rifle scope. At 400 meters, it was at the very edge of effective range for their small arms. But it wasn't impossible. She had made longer shots during hunting trips with her father. The problem was that she would need to leave her communication post and her machine gun position. If she missed, or if the enemy launched another assault while she was taking the shot, it could be disastrous for the unit. "Santos," Davis said, moving over to her position. "I know what you're thinking. That shot is possible, but it's risky. If you miss, we're all in trouble." "If I don't try, "We're all in trouble anyway," Maria replied. She was surprised by her own calm. 6 months ago, the thought of taking a long-range shot in combat would have terrified her. But now, with her friends' lives depending on her, she felt focused and determined. "Do it," Davis decided. "Williams can take over communications for a few minutes. Johnson can handle the machine gun with his good arm." Maria gathered what she needed: her rifle, extra ammunition, and a pair of binoculars. She moved to the best shooting position available, a spot that gave her a clear view of the eastern ridge, but also left her somewhat exposed to enemy fire. She settled into a steady shooting position and studied the target area through her scope. The enemy fighters were there, working frantically to get their heavy weapon ready. She could see 3 men around the recoilless rifle, and she could tell they were almost finished with their setup. Maria controlled her breathing and lined up her shot. 400 meters, slight crosswind from the left, target partially concealed behind rocks. She had made similar shots before, but never with so much, depending on the outcome. The radio crackled nearby, enemy communications indicating they were almost ready to fire. Maria knew she had only seconds to act. She selected her target, the man who appeared to be aiming the weapon, took a deep breath, and began her trigger squeeze. The shot would either save them all or leave them defenseless against the heavy weapon that was about to tear their position apart. The rifle bucked against Maria's shoulder, and for a split second, time seemed frozen. Through her scope, she watched the enemy soldier who had been preparing to fire the recoilless rifle suddenly pitch backward. The heavy weapon tilted sideways, its barrel pointing harmlessly into the sky. The other enemy fighters around the weapon position scattered, confused and suddenly leaderless. Maria quickly worked the bolt of her rifle and lined up a second shot. Another enemy soldier fell before they could reorganize and get the heavy weapon back into action. "Target down!" Maria called out to Davis. "The gun is out of action!" The effect on the battle was immediate. Without their heavy weapon, the enemy assault began to fall apart. The fighters who had been moving up the slopes toward the observation post suddenly found themselves exposed and taking accurate fire from the defending soldiers. Their coordinated attack turned into a desperate retreat. Maria moved back to her machine gun position and began engaging enemy fighters who were trying to withdraw. Her earlier training kicked in completely now. She was no longer thinking about being a communications specialist. She was thinking like the marksman her father had trained her to be, picking targets and making every shot count. "Santos, beautiful shooting," Johnson called out from his position nearby. "You just saved all our necks!" The battle continued for another 30 minutes, but the momentum had completely shifted. The enemy forces were now in full retreat, trying to break contact and escape back down into the valley. Maria continued to coordinate communications while engaging targets of opportunity. As the sun began to rise over the eastern mountains, the firing gradually died away. The enemy had withdrawn, leaving behind equipment and casualties. Bravo Company had held their position against overwhelming odds. Davis moved from position to position, checking on his soldiers and assessing the damage. 3 men were wounded, but all would survive. Their ammunition was nearly exhausted, but they had accomplished the impossible. They had defeated an enemy force 3 times their size. When Davis reached Maria's position, she was back at her radios, coordinating with the incoming reinforcements and medical evacuation helicopters. She looked up when he approached. "Hell of a night, Santos. That shot you made, I've seen professional snipers who couldn't have done better under those conditions." Maria just nodded. She was exhausted, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off. "Just did what needed to be done, Sergeant." "No, it was more than that. You stepped up when we needed it most. That recoilless rifle would have destroyed us. Your marksmanship saved this unit." Within an hour, helicopters arrived, bringing reinforcements and medical support. As the wounded were evacuated and fresh troops secured the area, word of the night's battle began to spread. The story of the communications specialist who had become the unit's lifesaver traveled quickly through the military network. Major Richardson, the battalion commander, flew in personally to debrief the unit. When he interviewed Maria about her actions during the battle, his questions revealed his surprise at what she had accomplished. Specialist Santos, your personnel file shows you as a communication specialist. How did you develop the marksmanship skills to make a 400-meter shot under combat conditions? My father taught me to hunt when I was young, sir. I qualified expert marksman in basic training, but my test scores put me in communications instead of infantry. Major Richardson made notes in his tablet. Well, that shot may have been the difference between this unit surviving or being overrun. I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star. Over the following days, Maria found herself in an unusual position. She was still the unit's communications specialist, but now everyone knew she was also one of their best shooters. Davis began including her in tactical planning, asking for her input on defensive positions and fields of fire. Santos, Davis said one morning as they prepared to move to a new position, I'm putting you in for cross-training as a designated marksman. Your communication skills are too valuable to lose, but we need to develop your shooting abilities too. The idea felt right to Maria. She had always been good at solving technical problems, whether they involved radio equipment or long-range shooting. Both required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. 3 months later, Maria graduated from the Army's designated marksman course at the top of her class. She returned to her unit carrying both communications equipment and a precision rifle. Her role had evolved into something unique, a soldier who could coordinate with headquarters while providing long-range fire support. The other soldiers no longer called her radio. Now they called her Overwatch, recognizing that she had become their eyes and ears, their connection to the outside world, and their guardian angel all at once. Years later, when Maria looked back on that night at the observation post, she realized it had been the moment when she truly understood what it meant to be a soldier. It wasn't about the job you were assigned or the equipment you carried. It was about doing whatever was necessary to protect the people fighting beside you. She had started that deployment as support personnel, someone who stayed in the background and made sure the equipment worked. But when the moment came that required her to step forward, she had been ready. Her aim hadn't just saved the unit. It had shown everyone, including herself, that a soldier's true value couldn't be measured by their job description alone. The Bronze Star citation hanging in her quarters would always remind her of the night when she stopped being just a support hand and became the soldier who saved them all,